I'm Ann Cosgrove, the Editor-in-Chief of Facility Executive Magazine, and this webinar is presented by Wireless Information Networks. They're a company that is a leading provider of indoor mobile connectivity solutions in the United States, including distributed antenna systems for high-rises. For nearly 20 years, Wireless Information Networks has solved connectivity challenges for major mobile network carriers across the U.S. Now, before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. First, please note the control panel that's on your screen right now. This is where you can submit questions in that question box in the panel. Please send your questions in for our speaker at any time, and he will address them after the presentation or perhaps during. Also, please note the orange arrow on the left side of your control panel. Clicking on that arrow will either expand or collapse the panel, so please be sure it is expanded so you can access that question box. I'd also like to mention that if at any time you experience a technical difficulty, you can also send a message to us in that question section, and we will address it directly right away. So now I'd like to introduce your speaker today. That's Chad Lembry. And Chad joined the Wireless Information Networks team in July 2016. In his role as Director of Emerging Technologies, Chad is responsible for expanding the company's cellular connectivity solutions to ensure property owners can continue to meet their tenants' increasing data demands. He brings 20 years of experience in planning and implementing state-of-the-art IT infrastructure solutions in high-visibility environments. Most recently, Chad has directed teams in the design and implementation of cellular and Wi-Fi solutions for both the public and private sectors, and these include major projects for city governments, universities, and large commercial real estate firms. So with that, I will hand it over to Chad. Welcome, Chad.
Thank you very much, Ann. I'd like to say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you, wherever you are all in the world. Today we're going to start off by getting a feel for where everybody's at with smart technology. So we have a poll that's going to pop up on your screen. If you could go ahead and answer the questions that are there and just click on the ones that pertain to you. I'd appreciate that. I'd like to get a good feel for how you all are doing. And that poll should include things like HVAC lighting controls. Those are fairly obvious. You guys should know what those are. Security, access control, CCTV is one of the sections. Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi often gets sort of bundled into internet access, so that's, whether it's, internal Wi-Fi or internet access. Cellular solutions for, the major carriers. I know that not everybody here is North American, but we will, sort of address from that perspective because that's where I am. So, we have 4 major carriers that cover, the United States. So, Neil, if we could get the results that I'm not actually seeing them.
Ann?
Oh.
Okay. Chad, do you see those there?
Yeah, I actually can see them in the audience view window. So I'm going to have to expand that real quick. I do apologize. Okay. It did not pop up on my screen directly. But it does look like we've got some people with some HVAC. We got some security monitoring, some Wi-Fi. Cellular solutions is sort of down at the bottom end of it, and then none of the above. All right, so let's take a quick look at that, and we're going to talk about some of those technologies. So as we get going here, the question comes up: what is a smart building? Over the last 10 years or so, the term smart buildings has come into the vernacular, and what it means to some people is not what it means to other people. 10 years ago, smart building was something that, if you had HVAC controls that you could control, on a timer, or if you had lighting that was controlled on a timer, or even, lighting that was on movement centers, that made you a smart building. But that term, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, has gotten much more intense. It's been about getting your building to be an environment where data is handled both by the building to control HVAC, access control, and all that sort of stuff. But it also, for the tenant side, it's a term that says that when they get to work in the morning, that their space is going to do what they need it to do to facilitate them doing their jobs. Or if you are residential, that they have the access to the things that they need to communicate. So for the tenants, and I'm going to again talk about what the tenants are. The tenants are your customers. They're really the front point of your environment. You want to make sure that those people are happy, content, so that you keep them for the long term and not just feed what they need today. For building owners, you want to look at your building as an environment that you can look at and decide what's needed where, when, and how. Things like community spaces, having internet access for Wi-Fi in them, or having community spaces like meeting rooms and the like be scheduled, and have those meeting rooms be useful in the fact that you're heating and cooling based on when they're in use. You're turning on the lights, turning off the lights, and all of that. What this means for the building owner is a building that is manageable with a much smaller overhead, also much smaller operational costs for power and the like. And what it means for the tenants is being in a space that you are comfortable in and you want to be at. So people are looking at, this slide hasn't popped up yet. I'm sorry, my interface seems to be stalled. Is everyone seeing the graph slide? Anne, can you see that?
No, perhaps did the advance work to advance the slide?
There it goes. It went okay. after the third click. I apologize, folks. So right now, people are spending about $7 to $9 billion over the last 2 years to upgrade their buildings' technologies to be what are smart technologies, getting your building ready to go. In the future, we expect the spending on this to increase by about 22% over the next year, and then another $3 billion and another $3 billion the year after that. So this is definitely something that is in the mind's eye. This is definitely something that the management companies and the owners of these buildings are realizing, that it's not just about having a nice facade on your building. It's definitely about utilizing your building efficiently and managing your spaces efficiently. By increasing your smart technologies, you're going to increase or decrease actually your vacancy, and you're going to have spaces that are utilized more often and by more people. And when we talk about that, let's talk about some of the technologies that are involved in smart building technologies and how they affect everything. When I'm at my office, when I come in the morning, I want to be certain that as I sit down at my desk and I dial into the webinar, or whether I dial into a conference call, or I dial into whatever it is, I want to make sure that I'm confident that my technology is going to work, that my computer is going to be able to connect to the internet the way I need it to, my phone is going to connect to the cellular network without cutting me off. But it goes beyond that. It goes down to the fact that when I come into the building itself, do I walk through the turnstiles at the front that are my access controls turnstiles? Do I just walk through them and my badge automatically opens up the gates, or am I having to wait? Am I having to insert a card into a slot as opposed to just having it in my pocket or on my person? When I get to the elevators, do those elevators, are they there waiting for me with the doors open because they know that I'm going to be going from the first floor to the 23rd floor, or do I have to go up and push a button and wait for it to turn around and bring an elevator to me? Is it the fact that when I get off at my floor, does my office know that I'm coming and has the door ready for me to walk in? So when people are surveyed about their workspaces, one of the things that their confidence in their workspaces is often colored by their commute to those spaces. So you want to make sure that your building services them in a timely fashion, and you want to get these technologies up to speed so these things do happen automatically. So looking at the space that you've got, do you have communal spaces? Do you have spaces that you need to have people have access to um, that are rentable spaces? Are they spaces that you sign up for and have access to them? Are they common use spaces where people can just come and sit? You have to identify the things that will make your tenants satisfied. So once you've identified those, you're going to increase your tenant satisfaction. You're going to increase their reason to want to be in your building. In fact, we refer to the term braggability. When you go out to lunch with your friends and you're sitting at the lunch table, what are you talking about? You're talking about, you know, what's going on in your life, what's going on with your business. And if you are in a situation where you're not happy with your space, the first thing that you say is, oh God, I can't believe when I got to work this morning, I had to wait 20 minutes to get to my office. Those are things that you don't want to have happen. You want to make your space braggable. You want to make people, instead of saying that they hate the fact that they can't get to what they need, that it's a joy. And hey, come over to my building and let's eat at the restaurant in my building because it's really easy to get to. It's really easy to get a reservation because they have an online system that lets you do that. So once you have that space that is braggable, you're going to increase your tenant satisfaction. You're going to have less turnover, but also you're going to be able to attract new tenants, and it's going to reduce your vacancy, and it's going to produce shorter turnaround times when you do have vacancies. Also, having your building outfitted with smart technologies is going to bring up the value of your property itself. Now, I know that not everybody looks at it this way, but there are some of you that are working for property owners or even management companies, and sometimes a property is something that you want to turn around, and that property is something that you want to, you know, come in, invest some money into, and then turn around and sell. By having a smart building and having the infrastructure in place to do these sorts of things, you're going to increase the property value of those spaces. All in all, it gives you a competitive advantage. It makes you the building that everybody wants to be in. It's the building that everybody likes to visit. One of the sort of anecdotal things that I ran across. There was a movie I was watching recently, and in the movie, the guy who's the bigwig in the company says to, you know, he starts up his PowerPoint presentation, and as he's doing his PowerPoint presentation, the screen flickers and goes out. And he says to the guy, to his guy, he says, "Hey, do you understand that everything else in my life works? So I just need everything here to work." And that's a good sort of summation of this, that people in their workspaces want to feel that they don't have any concerns that when they get in that everything's going to work the way they expect it to. So the question comes up, what technologies should a property owner invest in to get us this environment? So it comes in phases. You don't want to see a situation where you're trying to outfit a building from bottom to top. And as we saw earlier in the poll, some of you already have some technologies that are in place. So what we want to do is we want to take a look at the space before you start to decide, you know, what to invest in, and we want to decide what's there already. But once you've got a good picture of that in your mind, let's start at the basics. You want an infrastructure. When you're looking at your space, the biggest problem that most people have, and this comes from a lot of different areas, which I'll get into, but the biggest problem that people have is they're not ready. They're not ready to support big data objects that are going to make their lives easier in the long run. And this comes from the fact that it might be a building that's a historic building. It might come from a building that's an older building that just hasn't had the attention that it needs. It might come from poor planning. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that a building might not have the infrastructure that it needs. Now, we are looking at a modern age with a lot of data, and old infrastructures are not holding up to what's necessary to operate the technologies that we're talking about today. So we advise that buildings should have a fiber backbone run from bottom to top. Now, if you have a mid to low rise building and you're in the the 100,000 square foot to 300,000 square foot space, it's a little bit different than if you're in the high rise when you've got a million four square feet. It's a much different sort of animal to tackle. But regardless, you're going to want to have an infrastructure that goes from your MDFs to your IDFs. Now, for those that aren't necessarily technical people, your MDF is a main distribution frame. That is a room in your building, often referred to as a demarcation point, where you're going to have a place where all of your communications come into the building, whether they be landline telephones or whether they be, cable TV, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That main room then goes out and branches off into what are called intermediate distribution frames. Those are rooms that are spread out through your venue or your property. And our advice is get some fiber optic cable, and run it from your main distribution frame out to all of your intermediate distribution frames. Now, this is often something that becomes a cost that is a capital expenditure. And sometimes you'll see that larger buildings will get interest from major carriers, and they'll offer to provide some of this infrastructure for you. But in our opinion, this is something that you're going to want to control yourself, because you're going to want to have hands-on. You're going to want to be able to use it for all of your technologies, whether they be just communication, or whether they be access control, HVAC. You want to make sure that you have an infrastructure that you control, and that infrastructure will service all of these different uses. Now, most of the uses that we're talking about today fall into the category of Internet of Things. You may have heard that term, but they're essentially computers. Whether it's the computer that controls your HVAC or the computer that controls the music in your elevators. It's all computers. They're all going to use this fiber infrastructure. They're all going to be able to use that technology. And fiber is a technology that has been around for about 20 years in widespread use. There's often a discussion about how expensive it can be, and we're going to address that a little bit later on. But you're going to want to have a solid infrastructure. Now, the main request in sort of commercial real estate is wireless communications. Whether it's I need access to the internet, or I want to have a guest network that I don't have to worry about. I want to have my cell phone work in my office. Wireless communications are sort of the #1 request from tenants these days. It's the #1 trouble source, is that they want to have access to do what they need to do when they're in their offices. You don't want to have to go down to the lobby to make a cell phone call. You don't want to have to have meetings out at someone else's meeting space or in a restaurant, because you can't count on your communications to work properly. So we definitely have a big focus on wireless communications, and we find that if you poll your tenants and what are their big headaches? Oh, my cell phone doesn't work. Oh, I have AT&T and my cell phone doesn't work, but my guy who sits at the next desk over has Verizon and his cell phone works. So we get a lot of that. We get a lot of communications back talking about the wireless communications not working. There are two big technologies that you should look at here. One is Wi-Fi. And again, like I said before, that often gets the label of internet access. But it is, Wi-Fi. It's the 802.11 series of technologies. You want to make sure that you are up to date. I was in a meeting in Houston a week ago, and they were using 802.11b. Now, for those of you who aren't nerdy folks, technology that came out in probably 1992, and that was sort of the best technology they had for Wi-Fi. Just having Wi-Fi isn't necessarily what you need to have. You need to have good, reliable Wi-Fi, and there's a concept that comes up fairly often of coverage versus capacity. So coverage is a term that means that when you walk down into the lobby and you open up your laptop at the cafe in the lobby and you see Wi-Fi, that's great. You've got coverage there. But having coverage and having capacity are two separate ideas. And just because you can see that it's there doesn't mean it has the capacity to handle you and the 50 other people that are in that lobby trying to get access to that Wi-Fi. So not only do you need to make sure that you have it, you have to make sure that it's got the robustness to handle the people that are going to try to use it. So that's the first technology, is that Wi-Fi technology. The second technology is cellular communications. So everybody has their phone, everybody has their carrier, everybody has what they like. I happen to be a Sprint person myself, and I get teased by my technical friends all the time because, oh, they're one of the smaller networks, blah 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 blah. You've got what you've got, and that's what you are comfortable with, and that's what you want. So as a building owner, or as a venue owner, or as a provider of services, you want to make sure that you accommodate what's in your building. Not necessarily that you want to have, you know, a 4-carrier system that covers, you know, all the carriers and their old technologies and their new technologies, because that sort of thing can be expensive, and getting it paid for is happening less and less these days. So you want to make sure that you address what's there. So you want to make sure that you're reaching out and doing good surveys of your space to find out what's there. So the two big technologies, again, to sum up, are Wi-Fi technologies and cellular technologies. So that's that. The next here, we've talked about amenity services. Amenity services start to breach that sort of line between the venue and the tenant or the clientele. And we really talk about amenity services servicing that Wi-Fi need. Do I have Wi-Fi that has public internet access, and is it available in the entire building? Is it available only in my meeting spaces? Is it available in the restaurant in the lobby? You want to look at these amenity services and really take a survey of your space and find out where it's needed and what is needed. Do you need to have meeting spaces that can be scheduled? That's a big thing that's happening now, is that people are looking for smaller and smaller office spaces, but they want to have an environment where they can get a meeting room that is, you know, larger than what their office space has. And that's because, honestly, how often do you have a 40-person meeting or whatever? It's not very common. It's you know, usually 1 and 2 and 3 people meetings. So you want your tenants to be comfortable that their space services their needs, but that you also have these amenity spaces. These amenity spaces, though, just having them isn't enough. Having them be smart is important. Having it be so that when I come down from my office to meet with my 40-person meeting, that there's not already somebody in that room, that it's scheduled and that it's, you know, announced, so that the people that are coming up to it know that that's the meeting room and everything else. This is often serviced, excuse me, by a scheduling software, and then having you know, LCD monitors mounted outside of those meeting spaces that says, you know, mycompany.com is here in this space from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. and you know, it makes not only the space more usable, but it makes the people feel important, that their space is there, that they have this space and it's theirs to use. Again, this is going to breed loyalty in your tenants. They're going to want to be in your building. Those amenity services start to cross over to the climate control and the lighting. If I have a meeting at 1 o'clock and we know that, and it happens to be the middle of August and it's, you know, 95 degrees outside, I want to be in that meeting space and I want it to be 72 degrees. But you, as a building owner, know that that space isn't used all the time, and you don't want to have cooling running 24/7 to keep this room at 72 degrees. What you want is an hour before the meeting, you want the HVAC to turn on because it sees in the scheduling software that there's a meeting here, and that all of a sudden it turns on the HVAC, brings it down to 72 degrees, you come in, you have your meeting, and it's the temperature you want it to be. On top of that, you also don't want to leave the lights on in that room, 24/7. There are great systems by Honeywell and Siemens and Johnson Controls that will allow you to tie your lighting into that same scheduling app, that 15 minutes before the meeting, the lights turn on. Or, there's an override switch that's in the room, and you want to make sure that that is tied into it as well, so that if somebody does come in at half an hour before to set up, they can turn those lights on. But it's going to give you control over your spaces. It's going to make the people feel happy that their space does what it needs, but you as a building owner or manager are going to be able to look at that building and say, okay, I'm spending as few dollars as I need to spend to make this what it is, and I'm still meeting the needs of my tenants. And it's going to, like I said, it's going to breed loyalty in those tenants. And then the last piece of this, down at the bottom beyond amenity services, public safety. Public safety takes on a lot of forms these days, and there has been a lot of discussion about communication systems being written into building codes, so that, let's say that you have an emergency and you've got a situation where someone is in one of your meeting spaces or in one of your offices and they call 911, but they call 911 from their cell phone. So now you've got a situation where your cell phone has to identify where you are to the emergency folks. So public safety, there are systems like public safety DASs and things like that that will provide GPS information to your phone, so that when you dial, it tells your phone where you're at, so that the 911 folks know that. Taking that a step further, let's say that the emergency, God forbid, is a little bit larger. You've got a situation where the building is on fire, and now you've got firemen coming into your building trying to put out that fire. Well, those folks need to know that there is communications in the building, so that when they walk in there with their radios, that it's going to pick up their radio signal and make sure that they're communicating with each other. B, that they can communicate out of the building, so that, given the appropriate information, the people outside the building don't get in trouble, or inside the building don't get in trouble with, people doing unexpected things. A step further than this, and this is actually, comes back to amenity services as well, but the third piece of the public safety piece is location-based services. Location-based services are essentially an identifier to say, okay, I'm on floor 6 and I need to find, Johnson & Johnson's office. Well, I'm going to look down at my phone, and because there's location-based services in the building, I should be able to find that with either a point of view map or a directional map. But that same location-based service that I may be able to use from my cell phone is going to talk to these public safety systems and say, okay, I see 12 cell phones on floor 15. So when the building is on fire and those firemen really need to focus and know what, where the issues are, they're going to know that there's people in the building. You're going to know where those people are, and it's going to give them a leg up on making sure that your building is safe and that those people get saved. So these are some of the technologies that we believe are important to a building. There's obviously so many other systems that you can add, and it can be anything from, like I said before, reservations at your restaurants, if you have a building that has multiple restaurants, and things like that. But these are the things that we really believe are the strong needs to get your smart building to where you want to be. Infrastructure, having a good fiber backbone, wireless communications, good communications both in the offices and in public spaces, the amenity services, which breeds your loyalty in your tenants, and then your public safety that makes sure that you don't have an issue. So at this point, we have another poll, and I'm going to ask real quick, what is it? How satisfied are your tenants? And Neil, if you could pop, oh, there it is. How are you satisfied are your tenants with the level of wireless connectivity in your building? As we talked about before, one of the big requests, the big asks of tenants is having good communications, good wireless access. So if you could go ahead and let us know if you've got great, nobody's complaining about our wireless communications. Could it be better? Yeah, we get some complaints. Is it terrible? Are you on the fifth floor, and when you're on the fifth floor, you can't get anybody? So go ahead and answer those questions. And again, this is one of these things that you hear, hey, my CEO's cell phone doesn't work. I really need to fix this. That's what we're hearing a lot, a lot of those sorts of complaints. And people who are making the decisions about whether we're staying in the building. So looks like our great is not so great. Looks like our could be better is sort of the place where everybody's at. The terrible, lots of complaints, and then not sure, it's good. I mean, if you don't know, that's fine. But it looks like the could be better, and this is very, very common. And again, earlier on we asked, sort of where we were at with the technologies, HVAC, lighting controls. Everybody was sort of good on. There was a lot of people that had invested in that part, but the Wi-Fi and cellular were sort of down by the bottom, and that sort of rings true here, where you get that could be better. Really comes down to the fact that you're in a situation where you may have coverage, but you don't have capacity. And it could be that you have capacity, but it's not the right carrier and those sorts of things. So we'll talk a little bit more about this moving forward. So Internet of Things, as the world develops and more technology comes into our lives, whether it's video games or coffee machines or refrigerators, more and more things are being connected to the internet. Currently, the estimate for 2016 is there are 22.9 billion devices connected to the internet. 22.9 billion devices. That's a very, very large number of devices. And because there are so many devices that are connected, there's a need for more and more data. This is where we really get into the discussion of coverage versus capacity. You might have a system that makes your building smart, but if it doesn't have the capacity to handle the amount of data you're using, it can be very frustrating for the people in your buildings or your venues. So looking at some of the stats that I have in front of me, in North America, the average person has 3.6 connected devices. I currently have a tablet, a cell phone, a laptop, a Xbox, and that's pretty good for what I'm thinking of right now. So I can name 4 of the devices that I have. The distribution, men to women, men tend to be a little bit higher at 3.7 devices, women at 3.5. And then the economic spread, this is pretty obvious, as that the bottom of the scale, bottom 25% of the economic income is have 3.4 devices, and if you get to the top 25%, it's 4.4 devices. Not a real big difference. I mean, it's a big difference, because it's 20%. But really, I mean, what's the difference between whether I have an Xbox or I don't have an Xbox? So if you look at this chart that's on the screen, it talks about how much data we're using. So this is broken out into exabytes. Again, I know that not everyone's a technical person, but everybody says, I have this many megabytes, I have this many gigabytes, I have this many. Well, it's exa. If you go down, it's exa, tera, giga, mega, killa. Anyway, so currently, we're using in the United States, and this is a stat from Cisco Systems, we're using about 6.8 exabytes of data per month on wireless devices. So what exactly does that mean? Well, if I were to take my favorite album, Led Zeppelin 4, and I digitize it and put it on my computer, it takes up about 100 megabytes. If I have my favorite movie, Gone with the Wind, and I have it in HD, I just had it remastered off of the original input, as best a quality that we can handle right now, it'll be about 4.5 gigabytes. If you have a CCTV system in your building and you have one camera on it, but that one camera has 134 days of retention, which is not very common, 30 days more common, but 134 days on that camera comes out to 1 terabyte. Okay, we still haven't even come close to our exabyte. An exabyte comes down to, if you took every song on iTunes and you downloaded it, you could download it 29 million times before you hit an exabyte. That's every song on iTunes. If you take every movie on Netflix and you watched it in HD, the best quality that they've got about 8,400 movies at any given time. You could watch every movie on Netflix 12,000 times before you hit 1 exabyte. And again, I'm going to back up to that other graph. We're still talking about in 2016 using 7 almost exabytes per month. So if you took every word that has ever been spoken on the planet Earth, if you go back in time and history and you get the ancient Egyptians and you took track of every word that they ever said, it would take, well, it's about 5 exabytes for every word ever been said on the planet Earth. So each and every month, your users, your tenants, your everything, everybody in the world is using about 6.8 exabytes. So more than has ever been spoken on the Earth every single month. So it becomes a big, big deal to make sure that you've got the capacity as opposed to the coverage. You want to make sure that you have the system. You want to make sure you have the coverage. You want to make sure that it's in all the spaces that you need. I want it to show up in my lobby. I want to show up in my meeting rooms. But the fact that you have the coverage does not mean that you've got the capacity. So the question that comes up very often when we get to this is, I'm really looking at doing this. I want to make my building the smartest building in your town, insert town, Chicago. You want to be the smartest building in Chicago. But how do I do that without it costing me, millions and millions and millions of dollars? We're going to talk in just a minute about what these sort of costs are, what it's going to cost you to get to these sorts of places. But I want to talk about, budgeting for it in advance. So the first point on this slide is the right investment up front means no worries later. As I was talking about before, that once you put in your infrastructure, once you get to the point where you've decided that this is what you're going to do and you're going to make an investment, you want to make sure that you invest properly, and you want to make sure that you do it right the first time around. Let me explain what I mean by this. I had a client who came to me and said, well, we want to make our buildings smart, and we've established that I'm going to need 6 strands of fiber to go to every single one of the floors of my building. My building's 38 floors, so 38 floors, his building's probably, let's say, 1,000 feet tall. It's actually a little bit large, but let's say this building's 1,000 feet tall, and we're going to come back to why in a moment. But he says, yeah, I've decided I need to have, 1 strand of fiber for my security system. I need 1 strand of fiber for this. I need 1 strand of fiber for that. And he goes through his count, and he comes up to the number of, he needs 6 strands of fiber to do everything he wants to do. Well, that's great. He wanted to do security, and he wanted to do internet access, and he wanted to do some cameras. So that was his needs. But he wasn't thinking about, well, maybe later I want to have access control. Maybe later I'm going to have some spaces that I'm going to make to be community spaces. Maybe I'm going to put a restaurant in on the 36th floor, and I'm going to have that. When you go in to do this, when you're going in to outfit your building, you're building that infrastructure, most of the cost is actually installing that infrastructure. So the difference between putting in a system and that infrastructure, that backbone of fiber, and having that backbone of fiber have 6 strands of fiber in it, the cost difference between installing 6 strands of fiber and installing 96 strands of fiber is 55 cents a foot. That's the difference in cost. They cost almost identically the same amount. And again, we've established, and again, I made up a number, that his building is 1,000 feet tall. So let's say that he decides that he's going to put in that 6 strands of fiber. Well, he does it, and that's great, and he's got what he needs. But 3 years from now, he all of a sudden needs more fiber. Well, if he installed 96 up front at 55 cents a foot, he's looking at, an extra what is it, probably $2,500 in cost for that fiber, as opposed to what's it going to cost him to put in 6 strands of fiber more at 3 years later? What's going to cost you the same amount as it went in? Now, we generally use a number of about $1 a square foot for putting in the infrastructure for just basic fiber. And that's going to be if you are going from all the way up your MDF, out to your IDFs and everything else. $1 a square foot, and we're going to talk more about this in a minute. We're going to talk about the actual cost of it here coming up. But there's obviously efficiencies that you can achieve by making sure that you invest the money up front and have what you need in place the first time around. Now, we often talk about how to fund these projects, and there's often, if you have a building and you're in a situation where, let's say you're the New York, let's do the New World Trade Center in New York that they just built. So this is a project that I worked on, and it came down to the fact that they were building the new building. Well, of course, when we started to talk about communications and having it you have what it needs. This is a premier property. It's in the heart of New York, and everybody knows what it is. Well, AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, and Sprint all came to us and said, hey, we want to be in that building, and we'll pay for your infrastructure for you. This is the world of about 5 years ago. The carriers, the AT&Ts of the world, wanted to be in all these high-profile places, be they airports, be they sports stadiums, be they the World Trade Center. There's a wish and a want, and there are dollars that those carriers will spend towards putting in that infrastructure to get them the access to those buildings. This is happening less and less as the years go by. The carriers are either have already done the buildings that they want to do, or are having less and less in their budget to do this sort of thing. So there are carrier-funded options, and if you have sort of a high-profile property, you can often get interest in helping you put in these solutions. But it's happening less and less. What is happening is solution providers. DAS is a term that's on here. Let me explain that really quickly. DAS stands for Distributed Antenna System. It's often a way of providing these wireless communications in a building and doing it on one system, so you don't have 2, 3, 4 systems in your building providing the same sort of service. So that's what DAS stands for. And there are a number of companies that are often referred to as 3POs, third-party operators, and they often, if it's not the carriers that want to have access, these companies will sometimes have interest in your building, whether you are a civic center or whether you're a big commercial real estate building above 1 million square feet. Some of these 3POs are going to be interested in funding that system for you and then marketing it out to the carriers. And then the next piece of this, and it's not on the slide, but the next piece is enterprise. You are the enterprise. You, the people that own these buildings, are the enterprise. You have the ability to reach out and prepare your building. So let's say that the carriers have a cutoff, and this is a very common sort of thing in the industry, that AT&T, if your building is less than 1 million square feet, AT&T just doesn't have the budget to help you out. If it's below 750,000 square feet, the 3POs, the other, the middle ground folks, don't necessarily have the dollars to spend on you. So you may have to reach out and reach into your pockets to help build these environments. Now, if you come in and build that infrastructure up front and the carriers don't have to invest anything to come into your building, you're going to get interest from those carriers because you are going to be a team player. You're going to be reaching out and saying, hey, look, we know it's expensive. We're going to help you out. We're going to put in the infrastructure. Now, from your side of this discussion, putting in that infrastructure allows you to have a building that is remarkable. It's a building that you can support all of these smart technologies. So by putting that in first, you're going to make yourself more attractive to those carriers, and you're going to get the access there. So let's talk about how do we see that? How do we look at those numbers? So this is a little return on investment calculator where we look at, what does it cost you to do this? What does it cost you to get ready and have these? Okay, so let's find the cost of a DAS solution for your building. And before I said $1 a square foot, there are some solutions that could be as low as 40 to 50 cents a square foot, and there are some solutions that can be $1.50 a square foot. We find that this 92 cents is a good number to use just as a couch side number when you're sitting at home at night trying to figure out what you're going to do. It's a good number to use. Take the size of your building in square feet, multiply by 92 cents a square foot. It'll give you a good understanding of what it might cost to put in a system to handle all of your fiber infrastructure and put in a solution that could provide Wi-Fi, it could provide cellular, it could provide a number of different amenity services, but this is a good starting point. This is a good place to be. Then find the cost of your vacant space in your building, because no one likes to admit, but if you've got 20% vacancy, you're losing 20% a month on what you could be making. And what's that vacancy caused by? Well, if your building doesn't have, any sort of smart technologies, it could be that, I was in a meeting and my CEO got cut off on his cell phone and he said, we're moving out of here. We got to go somewhere else. Okay, so find this space that you've got empty and multiply it by your cost per square foot. Then look at, okay, let's say you have 20% vacancy. Let's say you have 10% vacancy. To decrease that by 2% is an achievable goal. Putting in technologies that makes your building more attractive, it's going to keep your tenants longer. You're not going to have the turnover that you had before, and you're going to attract new tenants as well. To decrease your vacant space by 2% is a very achievable goal in putting in smart technologies. So once you figure that out, you'll see what your rent that's going to come in, and then again calculate it against time and just see what the cost is going to be versus that uplift that you get in your rent. So let's look at an example. So this is actual data. This is San Jose. San Jose, and we're going to assume that you've got sort of a mid-rise building, a building that's 400,000 square feet. The cost of a system on that 92 cents a square foot means that your system, all your fiber, everything else is going to come out to $368,000 to put in a system into your building. If you look at that and you say, hey, do we have this in the budget? I don't know. Let's look. The average vacancy in San Jose is 11.5%, okay? And the average rent is 41.97 cents per square foot. So the average vacancy, if we were just to decrease that 11% to 9.5%, 11.5% to 9.5%, we're going to recover in that uplift $336,000 a year. So your ROI turns out to be 13 months. This makes a lot of sense. It's almost a no-brainer. And again, I know that there is no such thing as a no-brainer, but when you're going to your management, when you're going to your owners and saying, hey, we need this, or you're going to look at your annual budget, let's say you're the city of Chicago, and you're looking at your annual budget, there's an ROI of 13 months to get this taken care of, and now all of a sudden the Daily Center in downtown Chicago or City Hall has cellular coverage throughout. It's almost a no-brainer. Okay, let's take a look at another market. Let's look at Detroit. Now, Detroit has come under fire recently about a lot of vacancy and everything else, they are in the top 10 of vacancy. They're also in the bottom 10 of rent. So this is sort of, I don't want to say worst case scenario, but this is kind of worst case scenario. You've got a system in that same 400,000 square foot venue. It's still going to cost you $368,000. That's what it's going to cost. It's not changing. But the average vacancy in Detroit is 19%. You know, decreasing 11 to 9% is tough. Decreasing or not tough, but it's tougher, excuse me, than decreasing 19% to 17%. So let's say you just recover 2%. Your average rent at 16.58 is at recovering that 2%. You're going to make back $132,000 a year. Again, your ROI is less than 3 years, and this really, in my opinion, of all the clients that I've worked for, under 3 years is an acceptable ROI. Even in a situation where we talked earlier about whether this is an investment in the property or it's an investment in the infrastructure, where you've got a building that you're only going to hold on to for 5 years and then you're going to sell it. Even if you're going to keep it for 5 years, this pays for itself in the first 3 years, and it increases the value of that property. And I don't want to say, but it's going to increase the value of the property by a lot. But this is just the hard numbers, looking at if you can decrease your vacancy, you know, what does it mean to you? What does it mean at the end of the day to decrease that vacancy by 2%? Okay. So how do we get there? How do we get from what we've been talking about to actually being and having a smart building? Okay, so at the beginning we talked about the 5 steps to increasing your smart building IQ. These are our 5 steps. This is where you want to really look at and decide how to get from the beginning to the end. So to start, you want to look at your building. You want to look at your goals. You have to decide what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Am I trying to accomplish, like I said, turn this building around in 5 years and sell it? Or am I trying to make this my 20-year building where I want everybody to come in and sign a lease for 10 years because they know that we're prepared to have it? Again, know your goals. Know what it is that you're trying to accomplish. The next step, decide what building you want to be. Decide what type of clientele you're trying to attract. You have to look around and decide whether you want to be the best, you want to be the most affordable, you want to have the fastest communications. Do your homework, because I guarantee that everyone that's looking at your building to come in as a prospective tenant is going to look at your building, and they're going to look at the buildings around you. So commercial real estate tends to be a very sort of small community. Civic real estate tends to be a very small community. Even residential real estate, building managers tend to talk to each other. So research connectivity in your areas, research the buildings in your areas, because you want to make sure that you can compete with the people that are around you. And again, what you really want to do is you want to make your building braggable. You want to make your building the best so that you are attracting more clients, more tenants, and having a better building that people are staying in longer and wanting to be around it. Okay, the second step, see where you stand. Take a look at your building. And now I'm going to encourage something here, and it's very, very important to the understanding of this. I know that you're not all technical people. I know that some of you may be real estate managers, some of you may be portfolio managers, some of you may be civic people that have, you know, an opera house that you've got to. You're not technical people necessarily. You may have some technical background, you may have some technical people on your staff, and that's great. Whatever it is, you want to make sure that you have somebody that's technical that can really guide you along the path, that can lend you a hand, that will give you honest information about your venue. So the first thing you want to do, go out there and survey your tenants. Go ask the people that are in your building every single day, you know, what does my building look like? You know, can you make an AT&T phone call but you can't make a Verizon phone call? These people live in your building every single day. They're going to want to make sure that they have what they need. So ask them what it is. Now this can be a double-edged sword, because if you reach out to your tenants and say, hey, what's wrong? They're going to expect you to fix it. So make sure that you're ready to take this step when you're talking to those folks. Talk to your people, talk to your staff, talk to your engineers, your building managers. They live in these buildings every single day. They listen when they get the, hey, our light bulb is out request. You know, those guys are going to have the information about, you know, what does the building look like. And then develop a current state assessment. This current state assessment, this is really where you want to have somebody technical on your side. And again, somebody that really wants to just provide you with the information. Go out there and have them run a review. Have them go out with the appropriate tools and judge the signal strength of Verizon, judge the signal strength of the Wi-Fi, judge the access control when you're trying to walk through a door. Does my badge get it done? Get a good state assessment, because this is going to be your plan of where do I go next. And understand that you want to have this in place and ready to go with somebody technical looking over your shoulder, because again, if your toilet's backing up, you're not going to ask your caterer how to fix your toilet. Don't expect your property managers to know the technical term for cellular or whatever it is. So once you've got your plan in place and you've got it sort of a good nod from somebody who's got the technical background, build on it. Build on your foundation. Take the systems that you have and fold them into the new systems. Take a look at systems that you may have in place. I did a lot of work for O'Hare Airport for a bunch of years, and one of the biggest problems that we had in there was these systems from 1960s through 1980s that weren't in use anymore, and there was all these cables hanging around, and there was all this stuff in the riser. There was all these things that need to be pulled out. So get a good grasp, excuse me, on what you've got and what you're going for. Make sure that the systems that can be reused are, and the systems that can't be reused are pulled out. Okay, free up that usable space and then put in a good solid fiber infrastructure. I don't know a single technology that we've talked about today that can't be facilitated on 2 strands of fiber. So make sure that you've got a good solid fiber infrastructure. And then at the end of it, retain control of that technology. Like I said earlier, you may have a building that falls into the category of interested by the carriers, and they may come in and say, hey, we'll help you fund your infrastructure for access to your building. But make sure that you're doing it in the right way, and make sure that you retain control of that, because again, they're going to put in what they need to facilitate their things. We saw a company that was one of the 3POs that was going out there and saying, okay, well, we'll put in a system for you, and we'll market it to the carriers, et cetera, et cetera. And then they fell down on those obligations. They never installed the fiber. They never got the systems online. Make sure that you have control over it. Make sure that your agreement with whoever it is that you're doing business with, that it is in your best interest, that technology and that infrastructure belongs to you. Because the worst thing would be to have 18 extra strands of fiber that you can't use to facilitate your access control or whatever. So once you've done that, once you've built that foundation and gotten the move on there, form yourself a team. And again, the first point on here, work with a technology expert. Work with somebody who has a good grasp on where you're going to be 5 years from now, where you're going to be 10 years from now, where you're going to be 20 years from now. Make sure that you've got somebody on your team that is got your best interest at heart. Make sure that they know your goals. Make sure that you don't go into a situation and they're like, oh, we're going to put in 144 strands of fiber and we're going to do this, we're going to do that, when you want to be the most affordable building. If you want to just have a good system that has good communications and nothing more, make sure that they know your goals. Make sure that they're not, engineering for things beyond what you're looking for. But you want to make sure that you have 2 things in the back of your head: capacity, which we talked about before, and scalability. Scalability is another one of those terms that's out there, but all it really means is make sure you're ready to move on those other technologies. And then once you're there, get your tenants involved. Once you have a braggable building, make sure that your tenants are bragging about you. Make sure that when you have new tenants that are coming in to look at your space, that you can say, hey, we've got a DAS, we've got public safety, we've got access control. Make sure that your tenants know, because again, beyond the fact that it's there, you want to make sure that they're aware of it, that it's not just a happy circumstance that their cell phone happens to work in their office. Make sure that they know that you're reaching out and actively pursuing, making sure that they've got what they need. It's going to, again, increase tenant loyalty, and it's going to get that 2%, recovered off of your vacancy. Once you've got it in place, once you've got it there and you've got everybody involved and everybody's happy about it, make sure that you keep on it. Make sure that you keep monitoring it. Make sure that you conduct regular surveys with somebody that has the know-how to tell you when something's going wrong. Because the worst thing you can do is go into your building and find a cellular system that covers AT&T and then have it break 3 months later. Your tenants are going to look at it and say, oh, great, it works. And then 3 months later, it stops working. You want to make sure you stay on it. You want to make sure that you resolve issues quickly and efficiently. And when somebody calls you and says, hey, such and such isn't working on so-and-so a floor, that you're right there and you're ready to go to fix it. And again, anybody that installs a good system for you should be able to monitor it and should be able to provide you with that monitoring information so that you can take steps that, you've got people on the 4th floor that the system goes out, that, the next day you've got it back up because you knew that there was a problem and you fixed it quickly. You want to make sure you stay on top of it. And again, tell your tenants, make sure that you go around to them, once every year or once every 6 months and say, hey, we've been putting out there, we've been trying to get you what you need, how are we doing? Get out there and communicate with them, because again, once you've established that rapport, you're going to get the loyalty from those folks. They're going to understand that you're really looking to make your building smart and to make your environment what they need to be successful. And last and not least, be proactive. Don't wait. Make sure that you're looking at your environment and judging what you need, and get out there and do it. Because the longer you wait, the more people are going to either leave your building or go to another building in the first place. And you want to make sure that your building is the building that everyone wants to be in. And with that, I'm going to open up the floor to questions. And Anne, I don't know what we've had for questions that have come in. Is there anything that I can address for anybody?
Thanks so much, Chad. Thanks for that great presentation. We have run up a bit against the clock, so I do want to get to at least one or two of the questions. I do want to let everyone know that if you have any questions that weren't answered by this robust presentation, please do send them over to webinars@groupc.com, and Chad will certainly get back to you directly. That's webinars@groupc.com. But we do have at least one question I do want to get to. You talked about the investment aspect of this, which it certainly is, and one that seems to really pay off. So can you just answer one of these questions? How do you get the cellular carriers enticed to help offset some of the potential costs that come with the infrastructure and connectivity you've talked about?
Okay, so like I said earlier, it's very common that high-profile buildings will garner that interest without any sort of help. But what we find is that the more prepared you are, the better off you are. So if you have a fiber infrastructure that's in place and ready to go and ready to be utilized, the carriers see that as you being a team player, and that they're not going to have to invest a whole bunch of dollars. And again, if you have a building that's 500,000 square feet that's ready to go, and all they have to do is plug in their signal source, that's a much different investment for them than having a 1 million square foot building that isn't ready to go. And they're gonna spend their $30 to $100,000 on getting the access to those buildings that are smaller but ready, than they spend the $2 million to build out a building and have that be a much larger cost to them. So what I would say is, the more prepared you are, and the more and the more that you've invested to make yourselves ready to have that fiber infrastructure in place, the more likely you are to get that access. And again, a third party, or like our company will do, we've got great relationships with the carriers. So once you have that environment in place, it's very easy for us to reach out to those carriers and say, hey, look, we've got this property, it's 500,000 square feet in Topeka, Kansas. Are you interested? Or it's 1 million square feet in Manhattan, or it's 100,000 square feet in Manhattan. It's a lot easier to have somebody that has those relationships in place reach out to those carriers, and especially if the building's ready to go.
Great. Thank you, Chad. Yeah, and at that point, it looks like we are out of time, so I do want to, thank you for your presentation, Chad, and to Wireless Information Networks for sponsoring the webinar, and of course, thank you to all our attendees for attending today. I did want to let you know again that if you have any questions that weren't answered, you can see Chad's email if you want to email him directly on the screen there, or to webinars@facilityexecutive.com, and we'll make sure he gets that. And then in addition, a recording of this webinar will be available online at facilityexecutive.com, as well as on the Wireless Information Network's website, and that's winconnectivity.com. Also, to find out about webinars from Facility Executive, please visit our site at facilityexecutive.com/education/webinars. The next event will be held on Wednesday, October 19, and that's addressing insights into sustainability for your next roofing project. So thanks again. Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Wireless Information Networks, and all our attendees. Have a great afternoon.